Good morning, and thank you for joining us. We're just going to give everyone a few minutes to go ahead and trickle in, and then we'll get started. All right. Thank you all for joining us for the National Center for Rural Road Safety's Applying the Safe System Approach for Rural half-day virtual mini conference. This is the second one that we are offering, and we're so glad to have you here today. My name is Jamie Sullivan, and I am the director for the National Center for Rural Road Safety. Our very first session for today's mini conference is session 4, Safer Vehicles in the Rural Context. We're going to go ahead and get started with just a few logistics. Our session today is going to be 1.5 hours long. To activate our closed captioning for the webinar, you're going to click on the Show Captions button at the bottom of your screen. You can also use that drop down to adjust the caption settings as well. And you'll see an icon to the right of the screen right now that shows you what you're looking for. We are going to be recording today's session for website archival. It will be available on both our webinar archival page as well as the event page for this mini conference. We do have a question and answer pod available today. We would ask that you please put any questions you have into that Q&A pod so that we can see them when we do stop for questions. We will stop 3 times today to ask those questions of our presenters. You can also alert our organizers of technical difficulties this way as well. It's a little bit easier for us to find them in the Q&A pod than in the chat pod. As you'll notice, there will be a lot of chatter going on in the chat pod, people introducing themselves. We will also share some resources with you that way, and we would also encourage you all to share resources that way as well. We will have handouts available for download today. They will be found in the chat pod. We'll put those in a few times over the next couple of minutes as people are joining us. We also would ask you to please complete the feedback form at the end of today's session. We are very interested in what additional topics you would like to hear from these virtual mini conferences in the future. So please drop those into that feedback form. And then lastly, certificates of completion and applications for CEUs will be provided within about 4 to 6 weeks after today's session. And they will be available for all 3 of our sessions today. We have a few announcements for you before we get started. We have released our latest episode of the Home Safely podcast. It is featuring Holly Kostrowski, who is an international keynote speaker from a frontier rural community and is also a traumatic brain injury survivor and traffic safety specialist. She talked a little bit about her personal story and how she became a supporter of tribal, state, and federal transportation safety programs. She spoke about the safe system approach in a rural context, and also some steps rural and local agencies can take to improve their transportation systems. So we invite you to go give that a listen, and you can go look through the other 8 episodes if you've missed any of those as well. We also do want to announce that Rural Road Safety Awareness Week is coming up July 13th through the 17th. We are doing the rural modes for this particular week with a video game type theme. We will have our daily topics of conventional vehicles, micro movers, transit, big movers, and unconventional vehicles. We do have a very basic website up right now just to provide this information for you and for you to be able to grab this save the date graphic. We do have more pieces coming very soon, including a draft proclamation, a draft press release. As always, we will have the daily graphics that go along with these daily topics. And as we get closer to July, we will also have web pages for each of these days as well. So we're just getting started right now on that. The next thing we want to make sure that you're aware of is the FHWA Rural Road Safety webinar series. The next webinar in their series will be held Thursday, May 21st from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern on innovative funding processes for rural road safety. You can use this QR code to register for that. Again, these slides are also in the handout available in the chat pod. And then we also wanted to make sure you were aware that Safe Streets and Roads for All notice of funding opportunity is currently open with a deadline of May 26th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. The QR code here will take you to the webpage where you can see more resources. You can watch the webinars that have been done on the different planning and implementation type of projects that you could use for SS4A, and a frequently asked questions page. And then one more final announcement for you is the 2026 nominations for Build a Better Mousetrap are now being accepted. Build a Better Mousetrap recognizes state and local government and tribal agencies who use homegrown innovations to improve safety in their transportation programs. These nominations are due Friday, June 7th. To apply for this, please contact your local technical assistance program or your regional tribal technical assistance program. And if you're unsure as to who those contacts are, please reach out to us at info@ruralsafetycenter.org and we will help get you in touch. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm very excited about this session. I'm looking forward to learning along with all of you. We have 5 spectacular speakers for you today, and I'm excited to get started. So our very first speaker is going to be Ryan McMahon, who is the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Corporate Development from Cambridge Mobile Telematics, which is the world's largest telematics provider. Ryan is a member of CMT's executive team with responsibilities overseeing the company's Road Safety Advisory Board, Government and Public Affairs. Prior to his professional career, Ryan volunteered as an EMT while a student at the State University of New York at Potsdam. Ryan holds a BA in psychology and an MBA from Worcester Polytechnical University, and I'm excited to turn it over now to Ryan.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for having me here this morning on behalf of CMT. So I'll start with just a little bit of background on who CMT is. So when we get to the data portion of the conversation, we can get a better understanding of where the information is coming from. CMT is a technology company that started from research at MIT. Our work is foundational in really understanding the risk components that exist relative to driving. It started in the insurance industry, where our customers started to use our technology to set prices based on how individuals drive. And that is now the case in 49 states in the US and all across the US, all across the globe. From that, we have gone and started to work with a number of mobility providers and food delivery companies and mobility providers to help them understand, identify risk, and prevent crashes over time. About $4 billion is returned to drivers in the US annually based on their individual driver risk. And it's through smartphones for the most part. So smart individuals download a smartphone app. That app is measuring components of sensors, the physics sensors that exist on all the smartphones. And then from that, we're deriving events based on individual driver risk, things like speeding, hard braking, hard acceleration, distracted driving, and others. That takes a format of a number of different approaches. And again, it's in every single state. Some programs are like discounts. So on the far left, you can see Nationwide's Smart Ride program. That program, the average discount, I was at GHSA this past year at the annual meeting alongside of a representative from Nationwide. They said that their average discount is 34%. So fairly significant to those drivers that are opted in. And 100% of the drivers are opted in. It's about 55 million individuals to this point, so quite significant relative to the amount of individuals that have participated in these programs. And they take a lot of different formats over time. And as I mentioned, the technology is pretty rudimentary. We're looking at the physics that are coming out of the smartphones. Smartphones are amazing contributors of physics data to the overall world. And we're looking at things like accelerometer, gyroscope, magnetometer, GPS, barometer, proximity sensor, light. And what that allows us to do is to read high frequency sensor data, and then from that derive those risk events. And those risk events are things like speeding, hard braking, harsh acceleration, distracted driving, and others. And from that, we have for years helped facilitate really a baseline of what identifies the factors that are part of driver's individual risk and what causes crashes. We're not just measuring these behaviors, we're providing feedback to the drivers after the trip, not in real time. So after the trip is over, the driver gets a notification on their app, they can open it up and they can see how they performed. And what's interesting about this is the amount of individuals that have participated has grown so significant over time that we can get to the point where we can look at the combination of individual drivers with different vehicles, because we also make IoT devices that go in the car. They sort of look like toll transponders. About 40 million of those have shipped around the globe. And then when we aggregate all this information together, we can identify road risk. And we're not just looking at risk data by itself. We also are identifying crashes. Those are identified in real time, notifying emergency services, dispatching emergency services through partners. And that work is leading to real-time emergency support. But then after the fact, we have the ability to reconstruct that crash. And every single crash that we detect is reconstructed via AI and machine learning. And then from that, it feeds our capability to identify those risk variables and how they change over time. This is a pyramid that was created by Dr. Ricardo Martinez. Dr. Martinez is a former NHTSA administrator, the first ER physician to lead NHTSA. And last year, Dr. Martinez and I presented at the New York Auto Show, and he showed this because it was in the context of identifying and understanding medical errors. And the medical community went through a period of time where they moved away from looking at the top factor, the fatalities, and they went further down the pyramid to identify risk. And the reason that they did that is they knew that in order to prevent the top, they needed to look at the contributing factors and they needed more data. And over time, I mean, it's actually shocking. Even in the 1980s, when dealing with, let's say, in the ER or in surgery, not all individuals were gloved up. That didn't change until HIV became part of the medical parlance. And at that point, people understood the risks became more significant. So over time, that data has helped really bring a tremendous innovation inside of the medical community. And that same capability of looking and identifying risk is really fundamentally what we're going to talk about here today. Today, the data that comes in to identify what is causing crashes in the macro sense, and in particular, fatal crashes, comes from FARS. And FARS is incredibly important. The challenge with FARS is gathering the information and the function that happens across every community, whether that be through paper or electronic methods, gathering up at the state level and then contributing that to NHTSA and the National Center for Statistics and Analysis. That group does amazing work. The challenge is when we look at this process, it becomes a lot harder to identify and understand changes that are happening in our ecosystem on our roads. And the perfect example of that is COVID. When COVID occurred, there was an incredible rise of distracted driving in March 2020. We saw it almost immediately. And it wasn't until a few months later, until the fatalities continued to rise, that people realized that despite the fact that people are driving less, the risk had increased significantly. So the idea is to really move beyond crashes and looking at leading indicators. So the capability is to measure the behavior across millions of trips, looking at the factors that lead to crashes, and then doing so on a timeline that allows the agency to identify those issues and then plan and solve those in a much shorter time frame. Plans can become much more reactive can be much more proactive instead of waiting for years to identify problems as they increase. And here I'm going to get into the data. So this is a very high level discussion. I want to offer at the end of this presentation as a link to my LinkedIn and my email. I'd be happy to show this for any community that is interested. We can get down to the road level, as you'll see. But this is as of just a couple of days ago. This is as of the 27th. This is a look at distracted driving by county, by county across the country. And what we look at is when we look at distracted driving, this is a Phone is unlocked, a driver is moving more than 10 miles an hour, and they are interacting with their phone. And you can see a cluster in the Southeast. In fact, Mississippi and Louisiana continue to be two of the largest states from a distraction perspective. But that corner of the country, there's no hands-free law in Louisiana and in Mississippi. In Alabama, it's a secondary law. And in Arkansas, there's no hands-free law. And you can see that generally states that do have hands-free laws, they do change behavior over time. Ohio, what I don't have data on here today is Ohio passed a hands-free law and then for 4 consecutive years had declining fatalities. They were able to look at the data and make a plan based on the counties that they saw increases or decreases in, and then dedicate resources to those counties as opposed to spending the limited budget across the state. And I'm going to spend some time in a few other rural states just so you can get a sense of the type of information that's available. This is excessive speeding in Montana, and this is looking by county. And excessive speeding is 9 miles an hour over. And we can get more granular than that, but this is a good way to layer through to identify where the most speeding is across the state. This is distracted driving in the same type of methodology, looking at the phone unlocked, drivers moving more than 10 miles an hour and interacting with their phone. Despite some efforts in the legislature the last few years, I do not believe that Montana has passed the hands-free law, and they have continued to try to combat this issue. We do know that the amount that it contributes to crashes in each state, and it is significant. Here's a look at hard braking, and hard braking is one of the largest factors that the insurance industry looks at to contributing causes of crash. Hard braking is, you can think about it like a coffee cup that's halfway full, and if you break, effectively that cup is spilling out. These are also can be termed as near misses. These are events that are very high G events, and when I show you in a little bit more granularity, we can get to the point where we can see impact. This is Carbon County, Montana, only 11,500 residents. That is not a very populated area, but does have through traffic. And this is a rank ordering of the intersections in Carbon County. And I'm looking at number 3, Billings Ave and North Street here. And you can see the amount of hard braking events is about 91 hard braking events per 100 miles of traffic through this area. We can get more granular and look at the speed at which these are happening. And this is where it gets really interesting. We have high G hard braking events happening on a road that has the 85th percentile speed at 73 miles an hour. And I was able to find this just by looking at a website. This is point and click looking at network screening and problem ID, and then doing a speed study all in a few minutes. This does not tell you the answer to what to do, but is the starting point to identify a problem. And in this particular place at US 212 in Farewell Road in Carbon County, this is a high-risk area. Here's a picture of that. This is a rural road connecting to US 212. And at that location, for whatever reason, the drivers are not engaging with the traffic control in the right way, and we're seeing hard stops right at that intersection. Furthermore, you can see when they're happening, time of day. It looks like Saturday from 9 until about 2 is a major contribution time, and I would expect that based on where this is in Montana, this is really a more of a weekend traffic area, and you can see both on Sunday and Monday. This is an issue for folks that live there that may not appear in the data until much later. And the ability to identify this and solve these issues from a rural perspective go a long way. This is looking at a different state. This is Ellis County, Kansas. And we are looking at the FARS data that has been loaded as recently as the FARS release. So this is looking at 2014 to 2024. And you can see that they're pretty sparsely isolated across the county. This is a zoomed in view. Unfortunately, every single one of these dots is somebody's life. And to solve these issues, to prevent the next crash, it's not enough just to look at the locations of where they happen. We got to look at where the risk is occurring. So, and again, here, same look. This is now the hard braking events. These are the high G events that have happened from 10/28/2025 until just a couple days ago, 4/28/2026. And I zoom in here on one intersection of 13th Street and Hall Street. And right there on the street vision, it happened to capture children walking through the area. It looks like this picture was captured in July 2024. And what we see if we go back here, we can see that area has a concentration of high G events. That is an area that now is something to look at, something to study. It's a network screening methodology that helps us identify it. And what's even more important is once we identify it and put an intervention in, we can see how quickly it changes because it's easy enough to track that over time. Here's another location. This is in Pulaski County in Arkansas. And Pulaski County is where Little Rock is, but it's a pretty large county. And if we go south from Route 530, Route 365 parallels that road. And these are all the FARS reports in this corner of the county. And again, every single one of these dots is somebody's life. So the question is, how do we know to prevent it? Well, there's one at the very bottom of the screen that I'm going to zoom in on, right at the intersection at Hensley between 530 and 365. And you can see a massive spike in hard braking events. And then just to the east of it, another spike as well. And again, these are high G events. And unfortunately, in this case, there was a FARS report in that time period of the same time. This is the road that's leading up to there. And if you can see it, if we were in person, I would ask them to raise their hand. But as we go, I'm going to show you there's a stop sign that drivers are moving at a high rate of speed that they don't see until they get close to that intersection, which is then shown by the high G hard braking events. And if a driver happens to be distracted at the exact moment, if they're distracted here, they don't know there's a stop sign coming up. They're just continuing on and proceeding. These are the type of things that we can do, we can solve if we have the ability to do network screening based on risk and not have to wait for crash reports. And if I go back to this again, and if you look at FARS, I don't know where that particular one is. This is not a live view, but I can mouse over it and actually identify it. But if we use the hard braking events first, if we have the ability to screen first, then we can take that off the map. So the fast loop, and we just published a report with GHSA on this, talking about the triannual highway safety reports. But the idea is really to do network screening based on risk and then look at all the interventions over time. When you install an intervention, you can measure a behavioral shift in 1 to 4 weeks. You can measure it, the day after it goes in, and you can pivot or continue or expand. And here's the other thing that I think is really important is the bottom right, public justification. It's often very hard to communicate the need to do certain changes across the communities. Being able to identify and understand these risk events provides the capability to do that. And here's an example of a place that is probably recreating itself in different formats all across the country. This is unfortunately there was a collapse on Teton Pass. If you've ever been to this part of the country, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's unbelievable. The pass collapsed, and then the detour was actually about an hour and 50 minutes around. So all that detouring traffic, and when I say this plays out the rest of the country, every time that there's a crash on a rural road, on a rural highway, the detours are much more significant, much more significant. And what happened on these detoured roads is we saw an 83% increase in speeding on those detoured roads and a 21% increase in phone tapping. That means the phone is mounted, it's unlocked, and drivers interacting with it. So now all of a sudden, the communities that are on that route are now subject to significantly more risk because the main thoroughfare is closed. And this becomes a significant issue relative to highways to rural areas. As I mentioned, as Jamie mentioned, I was an EMT in northern upstate New York. And, as many folks know, when you get off on one exit, it may be many miles until the next one. So what can you do with this? There's a few examples that I would love to draw your attention to that we published, and we're going to continue to publish on these. This is number one, what do drivers do when they encounter speed cameras? This is a look at that, and you can download or you can just go right to the website and report on this. This is the impact of speed cameras. This is our roundabout safer. The research that we have done shows actually an increase in throughput through roundabouts and a reduction of risk events. And we have detailed that as well. This is last week, looking at work zones, very salient right now, and looking at identifying and understanding how drivers are interacting with work zone and how risk changes when those are active. And as I mentioned on the Teton Pass, you can also get a sense of what the ancillary routes look like too. So effectively, every intervention can be assessed. Anything that with a date and a time and a place can be analyzed on speed, speeding, aggressive driving, near misses, and distraction. And this is just really the start of the conversation. The baseline is trying to identify and understand where those risk events are occurring, and then ultimately being able to apply solutions that can resolve that, and then know if they work quickly enough that you can gain public support to continue to do it, and then maybe funding at the same point, maybe even SS4A or other competitive grants. But the bottom line is, if you have an idea of what the risk looks like, you can communicate it, you can address it, and you can see if it works.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ryan. And thank you for going through a lot of that data for rural states. It's really great to hear that, because a lot of the times questions are about how much data rural states have. And I think we do have some questions for you. I do want to point out for our audience as well that Ryan did mention work zone safety. And one of the announcements I did not make earlier, but that I hope you've already heard, is that Every Day Counts, FHWA's program, just rolled out 6 new initiatives. And one of those is on advancing nighttime work zone safety. So if you haven't already heard about the Everyday Counts new initiatives, please go ahead and take a look at those as well. So our question for you that came in, Ryan, is what % of AI generated crash analysis produces hallucinations, and how is this checked for accuracy?
Great question. So just so the background is clear, none of the information that I showed is AI generated. All of that is physics. So all of the data that I just showed is physics related. The background, however, of being able to learn and identify what causes crashes, we do when a crash is detected, we detect it on a smartphone, and then we have a number of heuristics to escalate it based on the severity. From that severity, ultimately, the last person to touch it is a human. The human picks up the phone and calls based on a number of heuristics they see after trying to reach out to a driver. And then ultimately, every single crash is actually evaluated by an insurance adjuster in the insurance sense. So anytime that a crash occurs that is in an insurance approach, there's actually an adjuster that reviews that to identify and look at that. So there's a human in the loop, both at the individual driver level and then every step in between. So it's not like using ChatGPT. This is a very different process. But all the data that I showed is all real physics based. So that none of that uses AI. It's all physics data.
At the very beginning of your presentation, you had a pyramid graphic, and the question about this one is that that's only stages and not frequency events, correct? And that's because they believe that the near misses should be much thicker and numerous than some of those other stages.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not drawn to scale. I mean, the pyramid would really look like the fatalities would be small, so small at the top. And in fact, they're so small that they're not predictive. So that's what the challenge is. It would be we would be at, FARS would have very few numbers in it if all we had to do was look at the prior year's data or prior 10 years data and then solve based on that. But no, the very top of the pyramid is much, much, much smaller. Unfortunately, the very top of the pyramid where fatalities sit, it's the non-negotiable. That's the place that we can't have.
There's another question in here about the Carbon County slide that you had with high G events, and they're wondering if that system can pick up directionality. For instance, if the side street is failing to stop or the other direction, or even if traffic from the dirt access point at the stop sign.
Yep, absolutely. So we have directionality that is in the platform, and every hex, the piece that I showed, each hex is about 13 feet across. It's called an H3 hex. So you can actually look to see on the hard braking events. You can look to see what portion of the intersection they're coming from. And in that case, I just took Carbon County and I went to it, and then I asked the system to show me the top locations for near misses or high G events. And then from that, I zoomed in. But yep, directionality is part of it. And the ability to look through down to the granular level at about 13 feet is available.
Another question that we had come in is whether or not these systems can be used to improve rural post-crash care.
I think it's already happening. I have talked to Bill Katowski in Idaho about this, who about this exact topic from Lifesavers a couple of years ago, who works in Idaho DOT. Um, the thing that's happening post crash care today is, at least in the immediate, is any of these drivers that are part of these platforms that have crash detection turned on, it's communicating as long as there is cell signal. It's communicating to emergency services. That said, on a post hoc basis, the ability to look at and identify where those risk events are. So going back to Carbon County, I was a volunteer EMT, and maybe one of the things that would have been important then is changing the staffing or changing the ALS ability at certain times of day or days of week based on what we see from the risk, and being able to look at how that's changing instead of just looking at the medical runs for the past. We can actually look to see how that's changing and constantly pressure test it. So yeah, I think it could absolutely help with post crash care, both from a planning ability from EMS, but also from all the things that go into planning overall on road safety.
Perfect. And thank you one more time, Ryan. We do truly appreciate you being here to talk to us about vehicle telematics and how we can use them in rural, because again, it's not always something that we think about because data is not always available in rural. So we appreciate you speaking with us about that today. Our
Thank
next
you.
speaker, our next speaker is going to be Sarah Yehudik. Sarah is an engineering psychologist at the U.S. Department of Transportation's Volpe National Transportation System Center in Cambridge, Mass. She's dedicated to improving transportation safety through research and has specialized in transportation human factors research for over 10 years. At the Volpe Center, Sarah conducts multimodal human factors research across both surface transportation and aviation, including work on distracted driving, advanced driver assistance technologies, driver training, and HMI design evaluation. She holds a doctorate in human factors psychology from Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, and we're really excited to have her here to talk to us about intelligent speed assistance today. So, Sarah?
Great. Thank you so much, Jamie. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Yehudik, and I'm going to be presenting on intelligent speed assistance, both in fleets and rural roads, on behalf of all of my Volpe colleagues, Alex Epstein, Ariel Herman, and Alyssa Broder. So just to start off, I think that this is a really great segue from Ryan's presentation and looking at safety in a slightly different lens. And we're going to be going over a couple of different topics. I would say a little bit of a grab bag related to ISA. So covering what it is, how fleets have been using it, how it could apply to rural road environments, and then also this emerging trend of states looking to ISA to mitigate so-called super speeders. So looking forward to also hearing your comments and questions. Feel free to put those in the chat and we'll get to those at the end. All right, so before I start, just a little caveat that what I say does not necessarily reflect the views of the federal government. These are just findings and information share that we've conducted. So I know I don't want to spoil too much because the safer speed session is after this, but really vehicle technologies and safe speeds can go hand in hand. So again, I'm guessing that I'm preaching to the choir here, but really just want to emphasize how important it is to address speeding in rural environments. As you can see, when we look at fatal crashes, the time or the speed at time of impact tends to be greater than in rural environments compared to urban environments. And so there's some hypotheses of why this might be. For one, if there's more open space in rural environments, that can sometimes give people a greater opportunity to speed that you don't see in urban environments. There are also higher speed limits in some states that have a greater proportion of rural roads compared to urban, such as Montana, Nevada. And the number of crashes, involving speeding, it disproportionately affect rural residents. So 46% of crashes involving speeding occur on rural roads, but only 19% of the population is classified as living in these environments. So this is really an issue that we need to address and mitigate whenever possible. And one possible mitigation for this could be what's called intelligent speed assist. So, what is intelligent speed assist, or ISA? You may have heard this term kind of branded around, but it can mean different things to different people depending on the context. So, just want to clarify some of the definitions before we dive in. So you may have heard of passive ISA, which is a passive indicator, either visual or auditory alert, that lets you know when the speed, your current speed, exceeds the speed limit. So if anyone here has ever used Waze or Google Maps, you have probably experienced passive ISA without even realizing it. So if you're driving, you're going maybe a little over the speed limit, it might flash red, it might indicate, slow down, something like that. So that is an example of passive ISA. It's a useful tool, but it's not actually going to be able to reduce your speed. Contrast that with active ISA, which limits the throttle to prevent a driver from exceeding the posted speed limit. So this one caveat of this, or one important point I should make on active ISA, is that it does not brake. So, for example, let's say you are in a 60 mile per hour speed limit and then you enter a 45 mile per hour speed limit. It's not actually going to press or trigger the brake. It's just not going to let you accelerate. And so you'll slowly slow down to the 45 mile per hour limit. So active ISA, depending on the system, this can be an aftermarket system. It can also be an OEM system. For aftermarket systems, you generally have some flexibility in terms of thresholds. So, for example, you might allow a buffer of 5 miles per hour over the speed limit. You might be able to program an override button so that you can override the speed limit in case of emergencies. There are some flexibilities here. But long story short, research has found that active ISA substantially reduces speeding above set thresholds. And then I do just want to also differentiate active ISA, which is what we're going to be focusing on this presentation, from a speed limiter. So this is what is found in trucks, and that is a static speed limiter where there is just one top speed regardless of the speed limit. So that might be, for example, if a truck is set at 60, it can go 60 miles per hour, whether you're in a 30 mile per hour zone or a 70 mile per hour zone. So it's not quite as useful. Active ISA can be programmed either through GPS mapping, or there are some systems that read speed limit signs to ensure a up-to-date speed limit threshold. So as I mentioned, we are going to be focusing on the active ISA today, going forward as we explain some of the research that's been conducted. So does it work? Yes, long story short, it does. The city of New York implemented the widest public pilot of ISA in their city vehicles, and they saw a really great decrease in the amount of driving 11 miles per hour or above the speed limit. That was the threshold that they decided to engage with. The ISA devices were effective even with habitual speeders. So these are speeders that had previous tickets, previous citations, were flagged with telematics for high levels of speeding, and it was even effective with those with that subpopulation. So I know at first glance, it might not seem that New York City really directly translates to rural roads, but I do just want to point out that the largest proportion of reduction in severe speeding was shown in the 50 miles per hour and above zones. So this suggests that ISA might actually be more effective at higher speed limits compared to lower speed limits. And part of that might be because, as I mentioned earlier, at higher speed limits, you just have more opportunities to speed. So you have maybe more space, and then the ISA can actually mitigate that speeding greater than in urban environments. So ISA has received some greater levels of awareness over the past couple of years. FHWA, NHTSA, and FMCSA have identified ISA as a potential research topic or potential strategy. However, it's still not widely researched as of now, and there aren't a ton of organizations that have deployed it. So it is still exploratory, but it has gotten quite the momentum the past couple years. So that brings us to our most recent study that the Volpe collaborated with the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety on. And this was looking at how trucking fleets and other public or trucking fleets and public fleets who had chosen to deploy ISA, active ISA in their fleets, how they managed it, what the benefits were, and some of the lessons learned. So we talked to about 10 fleets for this project to really understand kind of like what worked and what didn't work. So first off, the fleet showed a very strong motivation for installing ISA in terms of reducing safety violations, number one, and just improving overall safety. So we saw, and I do want to preface this, because these are discussions, a lot of this might be anecdotal evidence, but it really points to some of the trends that we're seeing with ISA. So, for example, one fleet said that their CSA scores were subpar, and they really wanted to make sure that they improve those, and they turned to ISA as one mechanism for that. Trucking companies have faced a lot of high-profile events, these so-called nuclear verdicts, where they're found liable for millions of dollars for fatal crashes. A lot of companies wanted to avoid that and make sure that they were doing everything that they could to improve safety. In a secondary manner, we also saw that a lot of fleets were looking to improve costs by reducing insurance costs and then also avoiding speeding tickets, along with reducing capital losses such as bridge strikes or other crashes. So what did these companies and organizations see after installing ISA? Well, for one, perhaps most obvious, there was vast improvements in speeding behavior. So, for example, one fleet that we talked to, the manager said that their drivers used to get about 6 to 8 speeding tickets per week. And then after ISA was installed, that dropped to only 1 speeding ticket in 9 weeks. As I mentioned earlier, one fleet saw vast improvements in CSA scores from 65 to about 20. But then we also saw other improvements of other safety critical behavior, not just speeding, but related to speeding. So for example, reduced hard braking, reduced red light infractions, and even an observation of reduced preventable collisions. And this does make sense in that if you're not speeding as much, you probably aren't tailgating to a greater extent. So if the car in front of you brakes, you have more time to respond, you have more time to prevent those collisions. Fleet managers also noted that there was a pretty steep decline in the amount of time that they had to devote to coaching their drivers about speeding behaviors. So, for example, one named a 25% reduction, and this really allowed them to free up time to address other safety critical measures. So, what were some best practices? Mostly, we heard that it's really important to provide a demonstration of these technologies to ensure that your drivers understand how they work, along with making sure that your leadership understands the potential benefits for ISA, both in terms of company or organizational reputation, finances, safety, or driver engagement. Having said that, it is really important to engage drivers early and often so that their concerns, their questions are addressed. And that could mean maybe finding someone who's open to that technology to test it first. And then really the last point is just making sure that companies know that when they install ISA, that they can actually use that as a benefit, as kind of advertising that they care not just about their company and their drivers, but also the road environment as a whole. So I did want to touch on the growing trend of ISA in terms of trying to stop so-called super speeders. So you may have seen some of these headlines in local or even national news organizations where there has been several states that have approved ISA to be installed on drivers who have very severe speeding histories. So, for example, Virginia and DC have passed legislation. Other states, such as Georgia, are working on passing this legislation. And so we've really seen in the past, I would say 2 years, kind of this growing acceptance of ISA as a possible intervention for these super speeders. And so, really, a lot of this movement came from the finding that super speeders are overrepresented in these sorts of crashes. We had some high-profile speeding related crashes. You might remember the one in Las Vegas several years ago, where a driver had a history of speeding and was still allowed to drive. Um, Unfortunately resulting in multiple fatalities. And this is one way to really leverage vehicle technology to engineer out the problem entirely. So we're not just relying on coaching or training or fines, which have been shown to have limited effectiveness, but really make sure that we get to the root of the problem and ensure that people who are at a risk of speeding are unable to. So just to wrap up, how can we apply ISA to rural roads? So we've already demonstrated the need to reduce speeding risk in these rural environments. And ISA can be a vehicle technology that, as I mentioned before, can engineer out the problem entirely. So in these rural environments, because it is dispersed, that can make enforcement efforts challenging, and ISA might be able to fill in some of the gaps there. One thing that we noted was that ISA could also be an effective guardrail for young drivers. So young drivers are at greater risk of fatal crashes and speeding. So this might be particularly relevant with states that allow a somewhat younger proportion of, or sorry, younger drivers privileges. So some states allow either permits or licenses to 14 and 15-year-olds. So that could be an effective tool. I also want to point out that a lot of the ISA devices that we're seeing are actually aftermarket. So these could be installed on any vehicle. It doesn't need to necessarily be a new top of the line vehicle, and that can really expand the accessibility of this. So with that, I will open it up to questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you for going over all of the different types of ISA and really starting with those definitions. I think that was super helpful. We have a few questions that came in for you. The first one is, can the system read revised speed limits in construction zones?
That is a really good point. And I will say that each um, Each vendor is different. So some vendors might use some mapping suppliers, some use another. What we've heard is that these maps can be updated pretty frequently. So when we were talking with trucking companies, their drivers could also call in with potentially inaccurate speed limits that they found. And we heard that the turnaround time was about 24 hours that these ISA companies were able to fix it. Um, in terms of construction zones, that I think is going to be one of the most difficult um, differences to manage with ISA. And I think that that is something where the drivers do need to be coached to be on high alert. From what we've heard, because construction zones are so dynamic and it might change day by day, hour by hour, that it's really difficult for mapping companies to accurately reflect that. However, we have heard success in customizing mapping for school zones. So those are more static because they don't necessarily move, but some companies have been able to program it so that the school zone limit is only activated for the relevant time of day.
The next question we have for you is, could ISAs be used to control speeding in the way an ignition lock works for drivers with DUIs?
I think that's an excellent comparison. So it's with DUIs, we have breathalyzers to ensure that high-risk individuals are driving safely. And I think that the same attitude can be applied to these super speeders. So that's, I think, has been a really key comparison when getting people to buy into ISA, especially related to legislation and enforcement.
And our last question that we have for you is, have states been successful in implementing ISA as a deterrent for super speeders?
So, unfortunately, it's too early to tell. I'm optimistic, but really because this movement has only come into place about the past 2 years. And as I mentioned, only a couple of either states or municipalities have passed this legislation. We don't necessarily know the effectiveness yet, but I think that there is this increased buy-in for exploring ISA as a way to mitigate the super speeder. So, long story short, I think the data in a few years will have a clear sense of how effective it is.
Perfect, thank you. And hopefully we can have you back in a few years to go over
Yeah.
some of that data for us as well.
I,
I
I,
agree that this is a good technology. So thank you for sharing all about this today. We appreciate it.
thank you.
Our next set of speakers, we have 3 speakers. Our first will be Sherry Hilliard, who is the State ITS Engineer and Bureau Chief for Intelligent Transportation Systems for the Kansas Department of Transportation. She has worked for KDOT for 20 years and managed the first statewide ITS deployments in Kansas in 2008 and the Whichway Traffic Management Center deployment in 2011. She has a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from Kansas State University and a master's in engineering management also from Kansas State University. Another speaker will be Kristen Vershbo, who is the CEO of Castle Rock ITS, a transportation software firm based in Portland, Oregon. Castle Rock provides advanced traveler information and traffic management software for 11 state DOTs with deep roots in the challenges that define rural transportation: winter storms and severe weather response, work zone and detour management, oversized load and commercial vehicle coordination, and safety service patrol operations. Castle Rock has partnered with Kansas DOT on their KanDrive and KanRoad systems since 2020. And finally, our third speaker in this portion will be Chuck Miller, who is a senior project manager and fellow in HNTB's Kansas City office with over 40 years transportation planning, traffic engineering, and intelligent transportation systems experience. He is serving as the consultant project manager assisting KDOT with the US 83 Advanced Technology Project. Chuck has a PhD in civil engineering from Vanderbilt University, along with master's and bachelor's degrees in civil engineering from the University of Kansas. And I'm really excited to have them speak to you today about digital alerting systems When I reached out to have them speak about this, I had one thought as to what they did, and I learned that they do way more than I even could have imagined. So I'm really excited about this presentation as well. So I'm going to turn it over now. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. KDOT received a federal highway ATC MTD grant in 2021 that has allowed us to add digital alerts to our KanDrive traveler information app. The grant application outlines several goals, such as improving safety and the effectiveness of real-time integrated transportation information, as well as improving mobility in the rural area that the grant was focused on. HNTB assisted with the grant application as well as administration of the grant. Chuck Miller is the project manager, and I'm going to let him describe a few more of the project details that allowed us to add the digital alerts that Kristen will outline a little bit later.
Great. Thanks, Sherry, and good morning to everybody. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit more, give some context of the overall project, and then we'll get into the details that Kristen will talk about in the digital alerting. So the project itself is on US 83 in western Kansas, going from the Thomas Sheridan County line on the north to the Finney Haskell County line to the south. It's a 131-mile corridor, a 2-lane roadway the whole length, primarily in rural setting. The project itself had a bunch of strategic approaches to help with safety and mobility in the corridors, and those can be divided up into 3 buckets. The first bucket was implementation of a KDOT fiber backbone from Oakley to Garden City, which is in the center of the corridor and runs for about 100 miles. And that's going to deploy a multi-duct conduit system that has a fiber optic backbone. That fiber optic backbone is going to be used by KDOT to connect to their facilities and connect this ITS equipment deployed in the corridor. But more importantly, the multi-duct system has conduits designated for use by private telecoms with the goal of enhancing broadband access in western Kansas. The second bucket is ITS equipment that was deployed in the corridor, and I'll talk about that in a little more detail in the next slide. And then the third bucket is the KanDrive enhancements, and KanDrive is the Kansas Department of Transportation's Advanced Traveler Information System. As far as an update on schedule for the project, the KanDrive improvements and the fiber backbone are complete. The other ITS infrastructure is under construction, and with that being wrapping up the end of this year, 2026, and then the system will be fully operational in the spring of 2027, with evaluation beginning then and extending into 2028. Next slide, Christian. Good, thanks. These are just a series of maps showing the length of the corridor, highlighting some of the infrastructure that's being deployed, ITS infrastructure. The cameras are shown in dark blue. They're deployed at strategic locations along the corridor, and some will use video analytics to identify queuing at high volume agricultural sites or access areas during the harvest season. Along with the cameras, also weather sensors have been deployed along the corridor or are being deployed along the corridor. Those are at some roadway weather information sites, but also co-located at some cameras, trying to get additional visibility and high wind sensors out there to have more information to share with the public. There's freight signal priority being implemented at the 4 traffic signals in the corridor, 2 in Scott City and 2 in Garden City. And then dynamic message signs are being implemented along the corridor to let drivers know what's coming along the roadway. Many of those are going to be permanent portable signs. Those are being implemented because of limited right-of-way along the corridor, and a couple of them are the full-sized roadside signs. Next slide. Thanks. And then the final bucket getting to that is the KanDrive system, and the enhancements are listed here on the slide, but they really fall into 2 different groups. The first group is focused on gathering some additional information and getting more information into KanDrive that can be shared with KanDrive users. And the second group of enhancements is goal is to increase the ways in which that information is shared with the traveling public, so they have an easier time accessing that information either pre-trip or while traveling. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kristen to get into some more details about those enhancements.
Thank you so much, Chuck. I just want to say it's so great to be here. I've got a big smile on my face, which you can't see because we're cameras off on this, but it's just amazing to be here with this incredible group. I'm feeling such a sense of optimism about our shared goal toward zero deaths based on the things that I have heard today from our speakers. So thank you so much for being here. This presentation shifts the perspective of how we're looking at the rural safety question to the DOTs that we work with, sort of infrastructure owner operators, what their perspective is on keeping the roads open, keeping people and goods moving along them, and that their expanded mission, I would say, in the last 20 years that I've been working with them, to not just run the roads, but to share and communicate with the public and with partners about what's happening on those roads. So with that, I'll intro my company. We're Castle Rock Associates. Our mission statement is to empower transportation agencies to create and share roadway knowledge that improves safety, trust, and mobility. And KDOT is one of many DOTs that we work with on this shared joint project. And we were so delighted to be asked by KDOT to participate in this US 83 grant to bring some real innovation and forward-looking thinking to the toolkit we had created together toward that mission of capturing and sharing roadway knowledge. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to the KanDrive Traveler Information System. It is a traveler information system we built with KDOT that includes several main components. It started with a website called the KanDrive website that we rolled out in about 2020. And the purpose of that website is to paint a picture for the public of what's happening on the roads, KDOT sharing its knowledge about what's happening out there so people can become informed and make more informed, safer traveling decisions when they're in Kansas. We were honored to work with KDOT to expand KanDrive to include a downloadable mobile app in iOS and Android, the KanDrive mobile app, as well as a phone system. If you dial 511 in the state of Kansas, a phone system that we built will answer the call and you can talk to it and ask what's happening on certain roads. And we'll tell you what KDOT knows about it, where the roadworks are, where the road closures are, what the conditions are during a winter storm. That is the baseline KanDrive system that KDOT invited us to expand through the US 83 project. So instead of giving you a bunch of numbers, and we have great numbers on the downloads and usage and phone calls for this system, I want to just paint a picture of the impact that KanDrive can have. So last January, there was a major winter storm that goes by the name of Blair, January 4th through 6th in 2025, that clobbered the roads in many states that you see on the map here, including Kansas. Kansas was impacted severely by this storm. And I want to show you, we grabbed a screenshot of what the state looked like and what KDOT was communicating with the public through KanDrive during that storm. You can see right away, it paints a picture of the driving conditions as reported by KDOT. You can see where the closures are. Major impact on I-70 eastbound was closed at the time the screenshot was taken. So what we're trying to do here is making it really easy to see what the roads look like out there for the public so they can stay informed and make more informed choices before they head out on the roads or not, as is the case during Winter Storm Blair. You can see we bring visuals in as well. This is kind of part of our goal of making it really easy to have that knowledge of what's happening out there. So here are day-by-day usage statistics for the KanDrive website and mobile app in that period when Winter Storm Blair struck. You can see we have kind of baseline users in the thousands, sometimes tens of thousands day to day with KanDrive. But during the winter storm, you can see that usage blew up exponentially. So the blue bars are website sessions and the gold bars are mobile app sessions. So this is the greatest signal we have that we have important information to share with the public, and it's meaningful and impactful. And we see this all the time when a major weather event, be it winter storms or flooding, affects the area. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the more innovative, forward-looking, hands-free, eyes-free KanDrive digital alerts that we've worked on in partnership with KDOT. These alerts are all about getting this information to travelers when they are out there on the road safely in a hands-free, eyes-free fashion. And I'm going to tell you about where we started and then where the US 83 project took us. So from day one, when we launched the KanDrive mobile app, we included a feature that we call Tell Me, which is a hands-free, eyes-free feature that allows users with a single tap to go hands-free, eyes-free with the mobile app, and it will talk to them about what is ahead on the road. So as the user travels, it will do a hands-free, eyes-free alert of upcoming roadway events on approach. That can be a crash that we learned about from the backend systems and data fusion engines that power KanDrive that we also built with KDOT. It will let them know about upcoming roadworks and lane closures, as well as complete road closures. Because this is a tool that helps KDOT share its roadway knowledge with the public, we know carriers, commercial vehicle carriers, are major end users of the system, and we have knowledge about where the rest areas are, and in many cases, real-time truck parking availability at those rest areas. That's available on the website and mobile app, but it's also available in the hands-free, eyes-free feature in support of safer truck parking. As if you have this feature switched on, we'll let you know what the upcoming rest areas are, and if we have real-time truck parking information for that truck stop, we will let you know how many spaces are available. And I want to say this is not a navigation app. We don't believe that navigation is something we should really be trying to do. There's a bunch of other companies out there that do it much better. This is not meant to be a turn-by-turn navigation system. It's a hands-free, eyes-free alert for what's happening on the road ahead that KDOT can share. And just to give you some statistics, we have learned that since we first launched the KanDrive mobile app in October 2022, there have been over 40,000 taps on Tell Me since launch. Okay, so what US 83 project empowered us to do was to think about where we go next with this and really moving the needle on these hands-free, eyes-free alerts so that they're better and more usable and easy to access for the public. And we set our sights on these two platforms, Android Auto and CarPlay, which are dashboards that if you have a mobile app on your phone that has created a integration with CarPlay and Android Auto, it will automatically be available as an app in vehicle dashboard. And it's requires it's a much stricter development environment, which allows for much simpler, safer alerts to people during the public. Is sort of pre-vetted and pre-tested and gate-kept by these two companies to make sure that what you build is in alignment with the safety principles of these two platforms. So, because KanDrive is an app that's already out there, it's an amazing platform. It's already got lots of users who've downloaded and used this mobile app. There's no need to create a new app for KDOT to push out to run in the in-vehicle platforms. It will simply, once Castle Rock added CarPlay and Android Auto mode to the mobile app, it's automatically integrated with the in-vehicle dashboard. So you can see the how it appears in Android Auto when you simply need to connect your phone to your car, and if CanDrive's on it, it becomes available right there in the menu. And these are some real-world screenshots of it being used. When you fire it up, it lets you know that there's no major events ahead and to drive safely. And then I'm going to show you some screenshots of how it works as users who have this feature switched on navigate the road. So we let people know in advance when a crash is ahead. This is the same knowledge that empowers the KanDrive mobile app and website. So we give users a visual and verbal indication of what's ahead. I mentioned also that the real-time truck parking is fully integrated with the system as well. So we do digital alerts for those as well, letting people know about the upcoming rest areas and what the parking availability is for carriers on the road ahead. Many of our states, including KDOT, will sometimes include pre-approved detours, official detours, along with their road closures. And we know that sometimes navigation apps don't always send users along those detours. So one of the things that we're doing that's innovative with this application is to let people know when there's a road closure ahead, if there's a marked detour, to follow the detour signs that are ahead, which is what these screens are showing. As I mentioned before, KanDrive is not a navigation app, but we don't believe we should get into that space as a developer of DOT apps. However, in the Android Auto mode, our KanDrive digital alerts can run side by side with your navigation app of choice, complementing the information that comes in through the turn-by-turn instructions. Okay, another major innovation that we were able to pursue under this grant was integration with HOS alerts. What KDOT wanted to do was use HOS alerts not on its smart work zone signs in this initial first step, but on their slow-moving maintenance vehicles and snowplows. So KDOT equipped several of its snowplows with the HOS alert equipment so that when the plows and slow-moving vehicles are out there with their beacons on, we get data from the HOS Alert platform letting us know where those vehicles are on the road. And we integrated that with the KanDrive digital alert platform as well. So when drivers are out on the road and they have this switched on, we tap into HOS alert, and if there is a slow moving vehicle ahead, we offer up a digital alert for that and advise the driver to prepare to slow down. This is not in Kansas, but another state of ours is interested in or is planning to roll out this feature there. We have extensive information in the backend system from the DOT about the state of the roads during a winter storm. And that is another alert that we are planning to integrate into the system. If you're driving through the state and we see that conditions are worsening ahead from a road weather perspective, that's another digital alert that we are integrating into the platform. And we are also tied in with national weather alerts through the NWS's CAP feed. That's part of our roadway knowledge project here at Castle Rock. So we have those alerts coming in, and as users are navigating the state, when a winter storm is approaching the area that they're in, we give them a digital alert about that happening and advice to drive with caution. Okay, in addition, because this is part of the US 83 grant, part of the advancements that KDOT was pursuing there is the tracking of oversized load. This corridor has just one lane in each direction and often is visited by oversized loads like the ones that you see in the photo on the left. Blades from windmills are frequently going up and down these roads and can have major traffic impacts. And we pioneered a really interesting innovation with KDOT. So KDOT began requiring oversized loads traveling on US 83 to download the KanDrive app, the same app I've been sharing with you today, and log in when they are about to do their oversized travel on US 83. So we built in an integration with their permitting system. So they type in their permit number right there in the app and then click a button to begin starting their trip and sharing their location while they're traveling on this corridor. And we pull this information into the system, and on the KanDrive mobile app and website, this becomes a visible moving event on the map. So this is a screenshot of an example of one of those oversized loads on US 83. It's showing the current location that's being shared by the carrier. We pull in the planned routes from the permitting system so you can see where that oversized load is going to be traveling. We also send in alerts to their traffic management center through their what's called their ATMS or traffic management system so that their operators are aware that there's an oversized load out there on the corridor, and then we share it with the public through the website and mobile app. And naturally, this is also a really, really great information to deliver to drivers through our digital alert platform. This is another slow maintenance or slow moving vehicle head, prepare to slow down. So that's another major innovation that's come through this platform. And there has been really positive feedback and general compliance with this, which has been a really amazing thing for us to see. And we are capturing data on the use of the digital alert system, and we have put together an effort to capture data on driver responses to the digital alerts in the KanDrive platform. So using some of the phone data that was included in our first presentation, we are measuring to see if drivers respond to those digital alerts, to see if they slow down. We're just beginning to collect data on this. The data it's showing right now that we're seeing an average, for drivers who respond, we're seeing an average speed reduction of 5 miles per hour after the alert is played. We notice that, or we're observing that drivers are reducing speed about 44% of the time on statewide roads, and we're measuring US 83 separately about 52% of the time on US 83. We are looking at this data with caution. These are just raw data that we're pulling from the platform so far since it was recently launched, and we're aware that the slowdowns could be attributed to other factors. So we're continuing to learn and adjust what we're capturing and how we're analyzing it, but we really want to see the impacts that our system are having and whether drivers are responding to it. Just a few lessons learned and things that we found as we moved into this territory. There are much stricter development environments in Android Auto and CarPlay, like I mentioned earlier. These are newer platforms. There's less standardization and less support from those platforms for developers like us. We found that it's actually completely different development environments, unlike other parts of software development. Android Auto and CarPlay were totally different systems to integrate with. We could not replicate the full experience in a totally consistent way across the two platforms. So that was a bit of a source of frustration. We anticipate going forward that we'll see more standardization across the board. That tends to be the direction these things go in. But for now, it's a bit of a Wild West and challenging to integrate with. Open data was key to success. The underlying platform we built for KDOT that powers KanDrive is open data. Haas data was made available to us to know where those snowplows are. We will pull that in easily and make it part of the platform. And I want to share also that all the data that's in KanDrive is also open data. We share it with the third-party navigation apps and any third parties that are interested in getting this information and using it. That has been a part of the platform since day one as well. We're doing some really innovative, forward-looking projects and experiments here, but we don't believe we're the only ones who can do anything with this, and that sharing this data is with others is essential. Getting the word out about these features is also a major challenge, and KDOT did a phenomenal job promoting these new features on social media with their communications team. That's not something that DOTs do a lot with these amazing projects that they put a lot into. And like when JB introduced us and said, I was so surprised to hear all the things that were going on at KDOT. I think that's something we still have a ways to go into getting the word out about our project here of really getting that information out there about the state of the roads by the agencies that are operating it. And as always, we plan to keep studying, learning, and adapting going forward. We've been working on these KanDrive systems for decades at Castle Rock, and the way it looks now is really different from how it's going to look forward. And we are continuing to approach it with curiosity and an eye both on the data as well as what we're hearing from people who give us feedback on the system and adapt it going forward. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you to all of you for that great introduction to your KanDrive system. I was noticing in the chat that a couple other people have talked about having similar systems, just not doing exactly the same thing that yours is doing. So that's fantastic. We do not have any questions right now, but I would ask our audience, we are at the very last question and answer for this particular session. So if you do have any questions, please put those into the Q&A pod at this time, and we'll go ahead and take them. As we're waiting to see if any questions come in, I am going to go ahead and just run through real quick what's coming up for the rest of the day, and then we will go back to see if we had any questions come in. So again, please put any questions in the Q&A pod for any of our 5 speakers. So after we do finish up today's session right now, this session number 4, we will take a 30-minute break during our mini conference. We will join back again at 1 p.m. Eastern time for session 5, which will be safer speeds in the rural context. That will be another hour-and-a-half long session. We'll take another 30-minute break, and then we will join for session 6 at 3 p.m. Eastern, which will be post-crash care in the rural context. All right, so let me just see if we had any questions come in for our final speakers. It does not look like we did. I do want to thank you all for joining the first session, session 4, Safer Vehicles in the Rural Context, for our Applying the Safe System approach for rural virtual mini conference. I did neglect to say it earlier, but I do want to thank our co-host, NLTAPA's Safety Working Group, for co-hosting today's mini conference as well. And we do have some questions in here about the same link. No, each of our sessions today will have their own individual links. You can register if you have not already on our website, ruralsafetycenter.org, and either under the training registration dropdown on our website, or you can go to the events and look for the virtual mini conference, and you'll be able to register there in both places. It will take you to the same location. So thank you one more time to all of our speakers today, Ryan McMahon, Sarah Udick, Sherry Hilliard, Kristen Vershbo, and Chuck Miller. We do really appreciate you all speaking today, providing all of the great information that you did. We had 3 fantastic training sessions or discussions on very different topics for safer vehicles. And for the audience who joined us, thank you for joining. And don't forget to download the participant handout so that you have a reference back to all the great information and links that you heard about today. So thank you, and we'll see you in a half an hour at our next session.